Hey, Mimsy here. The number one thing, not the number one thing, I'm gonna start with a number one, but number 5 is, I think, the most important thing. The first thing that you should avoid when you're starting to do upholstery is not spend a ton of money on fabric your first go round, or a ton of money on a piece of furniture, or don't use a beloved piece of furniture for your first try. I would probably go to a garage sale or a thrift store or something like that for your first project. In case you scrap it, then it's not a big loss. So that would be my first tip, is just to use an inexpensive fabric or even potentially a drop cloth for your very first upholstery project. I was surprised when somebody said they had never thought of using drop cloth for upholstery, and I could see upholstery, but for slipcover, so I was doing a slipcover and I suggested using drop cloth for a slipcover, and somebody was surprised by that, and I thought that was like what everybody did back in like 2000s. So yeah, drop cloth is a really inexpensive way to get in the game with fabric. Number 2 that you don't want to do when you're starting upholstery, everything else is motivational or inspirational. So don't just strip your piece willy-nilly. You need to have a method to the madness when you're stripping your piece, because you really want to be able to keep the pieces, if possible, intact as much as possible, so that you can utilize that fabric for cutting out your new, as your pattern for cutting out your new fabric. So don't just start cutting away the fabric and tearing it off of your chair, because you want to use that fabric, number 1, and you also don't want to damage your piece of furniture. So there's definitely some best practices for stripping furniture, and I have a video on how to strip your furniture. You can watch that video here. Don't just start cutting into it. Watch a video or 2 before you start stripping your fabric. Yeah, and you don't need to necessarily take out every single staple. Anyway, that's technical stuff, and I'll make a whole separate video for that, because that's a very controversial subject with upholsterers. Number 3 is don't be a perfectionist. Aim for B- work. It doesn't have to be perfect your first try, and don't let perfectionism kill your enthusiasm. Just aim for B- work and get the job done, because really you're probably gonna finish it and it's gonna be far better than you anticipated. But just finish it, don't be perfecting every little bitty thing. Just get it done, B- work, and it's still above average. And by the time you're done with the whole thing, you're probably gonna be thrilled with the results. Just get started, just do it. Number 4 thing to avoid when you're starting upholstery is you don't need to buy all the gear. Don't buy all the gear before you get started. You don't have to have crazy gear. You can get by with a flathead screwdriver, a pair of pliers, and a stapler. An electric staple would be amazing, but a compressor and a staple gun is the best thing. But you can just use a manual stapler. I wouldn't suggest that, but you can get a compressor and a staple gun for less than $100. I think I bought my pancake compressor for $79 and my staple gun was like $21. The pneumatic staple guns are super cheap at Harbor Freight or even at Home Depot, and who knows, you might have a compressor already for blowing up your car tires and your bike tires and your basketballs and things. So you could potentially get started on this with just the investment of a pneumatic staple gun. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy all this stuff. Just use what you've got to start with, and if you end up loving upholstery, doing more and more pieces, which I guarantee you will, because it's so satisfying to see your piece come together and look at your finished product in your home with your beautiful fabric, you're gonna be hooked. Once you do your first piece, you're gonna be hooked. So then you can every project get yourself a new tool. Like the second thing I would probably buy would be a staple puller, and then you can get yourself a regulator, and then a good pair, on and on. The list goes on, and I do have a video on exactly what you need, but don't go and buy all the gear before getting started. Just get started with what you have. One more thing about the gear that you need to have. So you really don't need a whole lot of gear, but on some upholstery projects, most really, you do need to have a sewing machine. It doesn't need to be anything special, because in upholstery, the most sewing that you're going to do is mostly the cushions. So if you have a piece that doesn't have a loose use cushion. You may not have any sewing to do at all. You might not even need a sewing machine. Keep that in mind. You don't need to have a commercial sewing machine or an expensive sewing machine. And if you're strategic about picking the piece of furniture that you want, you may not have to do any sewing at all. And that's the beauty of upholstery compared to slipcovers. Slipcovers, you have to sew everything, but upholstery, you have to do very little sewing. If you're looking for the perfect piece of furniture, watch this video because I actually show you some pieces that you don't have to do any sewing on. Well, except for the welt. But you could use GIMP cord. You could buy pre-made welt. And welt is super easy to sew. The fifth thing to avoid when starting upholstery is to avoid fear. Fear of failure. You don't need to be afraid. Just get started. There's nothing to be afraid of. What's the worst thing that could happen? You end up with a half-done piece. If that's the worst thing, you could take it to an upholsterer and have them finish it. So just don't be afraid to try it. You know, watch a couple videos and just get started. You have nothing to lose, particularly if you are using an inexpensive fabric and you picked up a piece of furniture on the side of the road or at the Salvation Army or at a garage sale. So just get started. You kind of can't make a mistake that's unfixable. The worst thing that could happen is, I don't know, you might scratch a piece of wood. That's why you want to use a thrift store piece to start with. The only thing that I can think of is that you might waste a little bit of time, a little bit of fabric. But so pick up a piece at a thrift store, a garage sale, or side of the road. And if you're unsure what type of furniture to start upholstery with, what would be the most appropriate type of furniture to upholster for a very beginner upholsterer, you can watch that video here. I have a video that talks about what type of furniture is ideal for a beginner to start an upholstery project. So watch that video.